Want to see some bullshit? Well, for the past 10 months, I've been making a classic-style survival horror game inspired by OGs like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, called The Revanchist. If you've been watching for a bit, you'll know that I made tons of small games as a kid, but this is my first real project. I don't really know how to do anything, I also don't like tutorials, but I am a pretty damn good problem solver. And as you can imagine, we're not quite doing things by the book.
By book.
So as part of this behind the scenes series that I'm running, today we're going to take a look under the hood. And let me tell you, she needs a bit more than a tune-up. So if you want to see the inner workings of things like this, and this, stick around, you're in for a ride. And by the way, I've got some big updates on the project and an unscripted follow-up on my last, now unlisted video at the end of this, so stick around to the end if you want to hear that. Alright, let's talk sound. I've touched on it before, but this short demo is up to almost 400 sound effects, so I think it's worth talking about. And again, I'll be real, my only advice is add more sounds. Everything that does anything should make a sound, any movement or interactions. If you think it's getting excessive, you're probably off to a good start. Like the footsteps, you've noticed them before, but only a few people have noticed the sound of clothes rustling as they run. Same thing with the first-person animations, though not all of them quite yet, some are still in progress. Even just clothes moving around makes a sound, and it's a super basic setup to be totally real, but it really is a matter of giving sounds to everything. I've talked about the clocks before, but another one I love is this CRT hum, and I know most of my audience is old enough to appreciate it. The lights are also set up with a continuous humming sound, and I have a variety of different sound effects for flickering that I can pick from depending on the kind of mood I'm looking for. And while we're here, why don't we talk about the stairs a bit? I've glossed over it before, but why don't we do a little more detail for you? Here's a quick overview of the little animation where it bumps down to start. Look at all the sound effects in this simple sequence. Tons of different bits of metal creaking and snapping, otherwise this section feels like nothing. From there, have a look at all the sounds in the main sequence. Starting off, I've got a few overlapping bangs and clanks to give the impression that a bunch of the structure is just starting to give out even though the stairs haven't moved yet. I also play this long creak to bridge the gap and let you know it's not over yet. I then start the next part with a deep metal bang and loud, shrill screeching. Fun fact, that's just the gate opening sound effect. And as they start to fall, I added a loud, sharp scrape as the stairs rake across the concrete wall. I also added a trail of sparks to add some visual feedback for this as well. Now's where the real fun starts. I won't be going through every single sound effect after this individually, but firstly, as the stairs hit this crossbeam and clip through a cable I forgot about, it plays a few metallic banging sounds as well as some deep, bassy ambience to add a little bit of resonant feedback where it sounds like the bass is bouncing around and echoing through the stairwell. And this is also where a squeaky, shrill sound starts playing as the stairs swing once the fall has loosened whatever bolts are still holding it up, so it swings more freely. Then finally, I slapped on some reverb and disguised this little switch up in the music to help what happened just sink in a little bit more. So as you can tell, a lot of work goes into sound design, and I'm still learning it myself. For now, a few of my sounds like the footsteps are from free asset packs, a few are home recorded, but most are from Freesound. Usually I'll just sift through until I find something decent under Creative Commons license, then I'll pull it into Audacity, usually blend a few of the sound effects together, clean up the audio a bit, and do some miscellaneous editing until they sound right. Another thing that people ask a lot about is the post-processing. I spent a long time at the beginning of this project dialing in the look, and it's a critical part of the game's overall style and presentation. Firstly, you can see without post-processing, the screen is still pretty crunchy. That's because I have a little script that'll automatically downscale the screen to a vertical resolution of 480. And by the way, just to rub it into all the haters, I could get rid of the pixelation completely or scale it back to whatever just by changing this one single variable. I simply choose not to. But it would also reduce frame rates exponentially, so if you're one of those people who complains about Unreal Engine 5's performance, you're gonna have to do a little bit of soul searching here, I guess. But regardless, first thing I did is made a custom lookup table for the game, which richens and saturates the colors a bit and also slightly posterizes the image. After that, I added some minor color correction just to dial things in a bit, just tweaking the saturation and brightening up the shadows a little. Next is the post-processed material. This layers on things like the letterboxing and low health effects. It also has this section here, which cuts the resolution in half from 480p to 240p for a crisp, clean, and aliased pixel look. Again, the screen resolution in the options menu has no effect over the actual resolution the game runs at, just the final resolution of the image. 720p gets you blurrier, softer pixels, 1440p is sharp and crisp. This is a pretty simple function, and there's lots of tutorials online for it. There's also a dithering function, and I'll be real, this is one of the few internet resources that found its way into this game because I really don't understand it at all, so unfortunately I don't have too much to say on it. But as you can see, it's a very simple setup, but if you want your visuals to pop, putting some effort into post-processing really does pay off. Alright, so there's post-processing done. Time for a bit of a bigger one. Events. There have been people who've asked me before how my event system works, and I'll answer your question with another question. What do you mean? So I don't have any event system per se, and I don't honestly know for sure if I even have the right idea of what people mean, but let's look into how things tend to work as far as triggers and communication go. So all of my events are coded from scratch right now, but I am currently putting together a library of some of my most commonly used functions to help speed this up a bit in the future. So the game uses flags to track progress and events across levels. These are just named structures with one boolean and one byte attached, letting me share some very basic information across the game. This fuse here is a good example. When you switch it, it triggers the lights to turn back on and then sets a flag so they stay on when you come back to the level. But if we're gonna do a deep dive, we gotta find something a little bit more interesting here. So how about this scene here? It's one small part in the game's first secret area, one of my personal favorite sequences in the game so far. So to start, when you enter the room, a wall spawns in behind the player. The game uses a trigger to tell when you've entered the room and then takes the dot product of the player's direction compared to the line between them and an actor placed just behind the door to tell when they're not looking so that it can block it. Then it uses the dot product to tell when they're looking back away from the wall into the room. This triggers the number station to start. After a few seconds, this gentleman will spawn in once you're not looking at him, again using the dot product. But then once it's there, it uses the dot product to make sure you are looking directly at it when it disappears in a flicker of the light. Pay attention to the flickering and you may even notice a familiar friend chilling in there with you. Either way, after the dog disappears, look away one last time or wait for the lights to flicker a few times, and the item you're looking for will spawn on the table. The game's going to wait for you to interact with it before one last switch up. Now, the way that transition works is actually just a creative implementation of the same tricks I just went over in this section, so I'll let you speculate on how that works. I've put together some better ways of doing that effect since then anyways, so it's not really worth going too deep into. But another great example of this is the stereo in the cabin. You know it, you love it, it's a super simple scene. Basically, the radio plays for a little under a minute, then this happens. Would you believe me if I said this is the programming for that? This entire scene is procedural, and even though it follows the same basic structure, it'll play out a little bit different each time to stop it from feeling repetitive. As such, what could have been a single sound file with a timer for a particle system looks like this instead. But it's worth it to me to add a more detailed and engaging experience. Something else you've probably heard me talk about before is hidden scares, because the game does actually track how you play as well as some of your exploration, so depending on how you've been doing things, you'll encounter some blink and you miss it scares. Let's break down one of them, because I've already spoiled it a bit and there's a ton of these already anyways, and only gonna be more as the game goes on. So, under certain conditions, you might see an old friend on TV at some point. And here, whether or not you actually notice and look at the screen is the kind of thing that'll affect these supernatural goings-on in the future. But how do I even quantify that? How do I tell if you've actually seen them and not just quickly glance past the screen? Well, why don't we find out? First, I have a trigger around the area the screen is visible from. If the player's outside that area, it's impossible to even see the screen, so I can just ignore all of this. But once the player's in the trigger zone, it'll start using the dot product again, with a pretty wide margin to tell if they're vaguely looking at the screen. If they look at it for even a glance, that'll trigger the sequence to start. Now, once it does, you can interact with the TV for a closer look, and that's a pretty easy thing to track, but not everyone's going to do that, and you don't have to see the screen, so I can't just rely on it. So what do? Well, first, I check the distance between the player and the screen to see if they're close. Well, first I check the distance between the player and the screen to see if they're close enough, because with the pixelation and its consistency, I know exactly how close you have to be to actually make out what's on the screen, which is one of the reasons that the pixelation can't really be optional. Then I use a much tighter dot product to make sure the TV is more or less front and centered on the player's screen, that they're looking directly at it. And that trips a timer that counts for about a second. If the player was still looking at the screen for that long, I'm confident it's because they, the player and the character, saw what was on the screen. And throughout this process, I've also been incrementing a flag to keep track of exactly where this sequence is and just how much the player's engaged with it, which will in turn affect how things play out slightly in the future. So overall, an event system of sorts is definitely on the horizon for me. I'm compiling some common functions like dot products and standardizing the process of making these kind of things so I can speed it up a lot in the future, because make no mistake, this took most of a day. This took most of a day. Even this took a few hours. And along with a proper event system, there's a few more things I need to refactor. Brace yourself, things are gonna get a bit fucky. First off, the inventory system. Literally the first thing I programmed for the game, before I knew about things like blueprint interfaces or event dispatchers, data tables, even components. The inventory manager isn't even a component. It's another actor placed inside of the player character. I didn't even know the difference. And as I've continued to work on this game, I've just had to pile spaghetti on spaghetti on spaghetti to keep it at all functional. You want to see the function that happens every single time an item is removed? Whether it's putting an item into the item box, shooting a weapon, using some bandages? Boom! Now bear in mind, all this does is decrement a value in an array and remove it under certain conditions if it hits 0. This is unworkable, make no mistake. It's a rat's nest of hard references and dependencies, and it is first in line for a complete refactor. I want to make some nicer UI for the inventory as well, but this is just as bad programming-wise. All hard references, dependencies, plus all the logic for things like combining items happens inside of the widget itself, which is not exactly ideal. As such, I'm planning to rebuild all the UI from scratch as well with a new inventory system because it'll take less time than fixing up this old system. You want to see something else fun? Here's the logic that runs every single frame in the character to determine their movement speed. Notice all the magic numbers. Numbers without any name or explanation, you just kind of have to know what they do and why they're there. I have to do so much trial and error work to even tweak any of this because even I have no idea how it works. Not to mention, why don't we just take a look at the event graph for our main character? You cannot convince me that this has any reason to be this much of a cluttered mess. I mean, look at all this. Something else that's fun is all of my text, notes, descriptions, prompts, etc. are stored locally as variables. Even the item data for inventory items is stored in the game mode as an array. If anything wants it, it just has to cast. This is so stupid and the wrong way to do it. It's clunky, janky, and it's going to be impossible to localize. Well, I recently discovered data tables, and they're exactly what you'd imagine. I didn't even need to learn them. I just saw it in the menu the other day and said, ooh, that sounds like what I need. And then I made one and I tried using it, just completely winging it with no idea what these things even really are. And it worked perfectly, seamlessly, first try. So what this means is I could have started using them at literally any point with 0 learning curve. All the bullshit I went through wrestling variables and all the refactoring I'm gonna have to do to fix it, solely due to me being too stupid to see these things dangling right in front of my face. Pay attention to what's going on, folks, don't make my mistake. But either way, there is a ton more jank like this. From the text pop-ups on screen to the settings menu, it's all a mess and it needs a complete teardown. But I've waited until I feel like I know everything that I need in order to do these right. At least as right as I can, because I knew even when I was making these things just how bad they were, and I knew I only wanted to rebuild them once. Another thing that's going to get refactored from scratch one last time is the enemies. I want to use root motion for locomotion, which is apparently not so easy to do with AI controllers and pathfinding. There is one extension I found that would make it easy, but I'm broke, I don't have money for that shit, and it's only compatible up to 5.4 for now. Maybe there's a way to update things like that yourself, but if there is, it's way over my head, so I've been pursuing some other options. Here's my most recent attempt. It's still a work in progress, but the way it's working so far is it has a separate pathfinding component that runs slightly ahead and does all the navigation for it. Then the creature follows behind using a simple blend space to keep it pointed in the right direction as it walks towards where the pathfinding component left off. Now, I haven't made it pretty yet, but it does in fact work. And if you know anything about anything, I'm sure you've already poked a million holes in this. It's such a stupid idea. But I've just found a function that'll return points along a path towards the target, so I think I can phase out the pathfinding helper altogether soon. Switching back to the old enemy, there's a few more things I may as well talk about since it's on its way out anyways. Firstly, they get stuck a lot, I know. And this is because of two main things. First of all, their lunge attack will pull them straight off the nav mesh if they're pointed in that direction. They also like to just stand there on one spot and chill for a bit randomly. That's because they're still in cooldown from an attack, but have nowhere better to reposition themselves. These are going to be fixed in the new enemy. Something else about the way these guys work that you might find interesting, I haven't been able to figure out a good way to dynamically dismember enemies. I do have a couple of creative ideas of using things like pixel depth offset for this kind of thing, but for now, since the models and textures are so low res, it's totally practical just to swap them out for a completely separate decapitated mesh. I'm also experimenting with good ways to blend in an injured layer as well into the material to illustrate vaguely how much health enemies have left. But there's also a lot of logic that goes into the enemy's attacks. So they've got two main attacks for now, and yeah, temporary animations, a haymaker and an uppercut, again temporary animations, then a special attack, a lunge. The enemy does the haymaker if the player is moving slow. It has a longer windup and a shorter reach, but also a wider swing to each side, making it more dangerous to try to slip past. The uppercut cuts the windup short and has a longer forward reach. Because of its quick windup and long range, the attack is used when the player is running at higher speed. But the enemy also uses prediction to lead its attacks. Specifically, it tracks your predicted location after a certain amount of time, your average speed over the last couple of seconds, your direction relative to it, moving towards it, past it, away from it, and your direction relative to yourself. Are you running forwards, backwards, sideways, etc.? Firstly, it uses all this to hit where you will be instead of where you are, meaning you kinda have to juke it a bit to get past without being hit. But far more complicated is the lunging. Every time it attacks, it runs a check to see if it should lunge, and this is the function that makes that choice. Holy magic numbers, Batman, this function is a shithole. I have no idea what any of this does anymore. All I know is the lunge is there to counter players just kiting and walking backwards while shooting. In general, if your predicted location is out of range of a normal attack, especially if you're backing away from it, the enemy will lunge to cover more ground. It also mixes in a few randomly just to keep the player on their toes and make fights a little bit more engaging mechanically than typical zombies are. It's as simple as this. To dodge a normal attack, the easiest way is usually stepping backwards out of range. Sideways will get you hit if it's a haymaker, and you've got to react fast if you want to get out of the way of an uppercut. But for a lunge, dodging backwards is useless, you have to duck sideways. What this means is you still have to pay attention. You can never just check out in combat. One thing a few people have brought up in playtests is grab attacks, and yes, they're absolutely in the works, don't you worry about a thing. Finally, something I've just added to enemies is blood splatter decals. These were actually really simple as well. I started by adding this little block to the materials to stop them from stretching out or distorting or showing on the backside of objects. Then I made a simple function to trace an arc outwards from the impact point at a semi-random direction and spawns a decal if and where it hits. I also added some jibs to the head explosion and made the blood splatter everywhere around it, making it a real mess. Cause one game that I've grown up with that I haven't ever talked about on this channel is Halo Combat Evolved, and let me tell you, the blood splatter in that game after fights adds so much to the experience. To me, it is so worth the time it took to set up. Finally, let's talk night vision and hidden objects. So if you've been following this project for a while, you've probably seen the night vision screen before, and you'll know a little bit about my plans for hidden objects. Well, why don't we take a second to break some of that down? Let's start by going over how the night vision actually works. First things first, I didn't just desaturate the image. Cause you see, this kind of night vision uses infrared, and infrared looks very different on camera than visible light does. Different materials and colors behave very differently, and as far as I know, there's no way to do actual night vision in Unreal, at least not without going pretty deep into shaders and shit. So instead, all I did was pull the red channel out of the scene capture output. Here's a good example of what this does. So looking at these two hues here, if I just desaturated this image, they would basically both be the same shade of flat gray. But if I pull the red channel instead, you'll see the blue cube is turned black and the red one is now white. And while it's not perfect, I'd say it does a decent enough job at capturing the strange color shifting that you get from an infrared video. Then to get the actual kind of night vision effect, I just attached a very dim red spotlight to the camera and jacked up the exposure. So the light is so dim that you can barely even see it normally, but because the camera only picks up red, it looks white and far, far brighter. I then jacked up the exposure quite a bit, and I also gave you controls using the mouse wheel so you can balance it out based on ambient lighting levels. And combine that with some scan lines and distortion, and I'd say you've got a pretty convincing looking night vision effect, even if it is completely faked. But the fun part of this is it's actually really easy to make things show up on camera that aren't visible to the naked eye. Because in Unreal Engine at least, all you have to do is set one variable, owner no see, and then set the player as the owner. Now you have an object that's only visible on camera, and that's literally all it takes. Something that wasn't quite so simple though is this. Now, on paper, this is actually a really easy thing to do in practice, but that wasn't really the case here. So believe it or not, I've been working on this effect basically since the very beginning. I think the first time I showed it off would have been my third, maybe fourth video. And the way I started off trying to do this kind of thing is pretty much the standard method for this sort of thing. Portals. And by the way, that's how this sort of thing pretty much always works. Any sort of non-Euclidean geometry you see in games, it's just portals. Portals like from Portal. Now the problem is, my game uses Lumen, and scene captures, which are necessary for portals, aren't compatible with Lumen. They still work, but the lighting looks all kind of fucked up, and this was a deal breaker. And another idea I had was using the stencil buffer to mask out the hidden object. The problem here is you can't access the stencil buffer or any other scene texture from an opaque material, and a translucent material is going to look and run like dog shit. So with all that, I just kind of figured this is something that I wouldn't be able to do, and I dropped the idea. But one piece of life advice I've got for you. If there's a problem that you really can't solve, take some time away from it. Sometimes having that new perspective is going to make all the difference you need. Case in point, you can't access the stencil buffer from an opaque material. Scene Capture 2Ds work, but they don't capture correct lighting. What if I make a Scene Capture 2D that captures the stencil buffer onto a render target? Well, I can't access the buffer itself, I can access that render target from any material and use screen UVs to map it to the viewport, and then use that as a mask instead. Now, it's a bit of a hacky solution and far from perfect. There is a performance impact, though much less than if I use portals, and it also has to be specifically activated when I'm looking to use it, so it does take a little bit of programming on a case-by-case basis. But it was really easy to figure out the second time around at least, and super easy to program and really isn't that hard to work with, but lets me do things like this. So you best believe I've been thinking of tons of creative ideas of things I can do with it. And there we have it, folks. There's your peek under the hood of the Revanchist. If you like what you're seeing, give me a wish list. I'm not asking, go do it now. I'm also getting Steam playtesting set up, so if you want to give it a try at some point, now's a good time to drop an application in while you're at it. I also have a Discord. I'm kinda back there now, off and on, 50-50. And that's where I'm running my playtesting out of at the moment, and frankly will still continue to be the hub for that, so feel free to drop on in there as well. And one last thing before we're done here, if you watch my previous video, now unlisted, you'll know that I'm having a few difficulties right now. And first off, I want to sincerely thank everyone who watched that video for their support. It seriously blew me away. I was not expecting that, and it really has helped me come to a decision here, so thank you very much. So to make it super quick for anyone who hasn't seen, I have crippling complex PTSD, which has made it a very unsafe thing for me right now to go back to work. I'm running out of money, I can scrape by for a little bit longer, no big deal, but long term, I don't have a whole lot of options. And I think it's going to be a little while before it's wise for me to try to get back to life as normal. I've got a lot of very serious things to hammer out first. As such, I've been thinking about finding funding for the Revanchist. Now, I'm not really looking to make it rich, just cover my cost of living for a year or two while I work on it, and ideally not have a mountain of debt once it launches, because as stupid as it sounds, I really think this is one of my best options for income. And believe me, I do know it's stupid. But either way, I'm going to be focusing on polishing the current prototype into a more proper beta for the game's demo with all the features and polish I would expect in the final game, so I can get it ready for more public exposure. I'm also going to be putting together some pitch material, and let me tell you, as bad as I am at programming, there's a couple of things in this life that I think I've always been pretty good at. Presentations, job interviews, sales, those are a few of them. Again, my career up until this point's been sales and business management, so I actually do know a thing or two in these areas, and the way I look at it, even though I've never made a pitch before, it's pretty much a combination of these three things, so I think I'm gonna have quite a bit to say. So if you're interested in seeing any of that, stick around, because I think I will be making a mini-series on seeking some funding for this game. Additionally, here on YouTube, I'm almost at the threshold for some basic monetization. No ads yet, but memberships and supers, whatever those are, I don't really know honestly. And while no matter how broke I am always too proud to e-beg. I'm a salesman. I'll sell you slop with a smile on my face. So if you're interested in some unscripted, actual behind-the-scenes content and a smaller, more intimate look into the development of this game, please do consider membership once you see that button pop up. I don't really have a dime to spend on this game. I'm making it on 2 halves of a keyboard duct taped together, a mouse that won't click, and a C drive with 1 to 3 seconds average response time. Believe me, a few bucks rolling into this project here or there would make an enormous difference. But either way, thank you very much for watching, and have a fantastic rest of your day.